I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series in which I, Tom Martin, longtime journalist with ABC News, CNN, CBS News, and so on, have the opportunity to ask some provocative questions, thought-provoking questions of my colleague, my co-host, David Parker, who's in San Francisco. And David is the author of two fascinating books, which I highly recommend, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. And he proudly wears that title. Is that right, David? A San Francisco Conservative?
A San Francisco Conservative.
And
in parentheses.
I apologize for interrupting, but for those who haven't heard one of our other episodes, what does it mean exactly?
It means I'm not that conservative, but the San Francisco as a modifier says that. But I'm a classical liberal, and it might be easier to understand that by saying I'm a classical conservative. I'm not socially conservative, and politically I'm not conservative. Everyone should have the vote, and socially everyone's business is their business. It's nobody else's business. And economically, we shouldn't be spending more than we're taking in. If the government wants to do some programs and the citizens want it, then tax everybody to pay for it. And one of my big themes is everybody is not everybody. It's the middle class, that the rich are not paying taxes and the poor are not paying taxes. So be sure you want to do all these government programs because you are paying for them. The rich are not paying for them.
Right, good point. And speaking of government programs, that's a perfect intro opportunity there. I love reading your essays, and the most recent essay that I read has to do with the homeless problem. And your governor there, Governor Newsom, went through a recall election. I guess he prevailed, but homelessness is a big problem in America. I used to live in Washington, D.C. When I visited there recently, it's very apparent. I live north of New York City, and certainly my daughter lives in New York City, and certainly every time I visit there, it's very apparent. It seems like a natural desire to want to come up with government programs that help these people who are sleeping on the street. What do we need to, how should we look at the homeless problem?
Well, some people think it's not solvable. I mean, Newsom, our governor, he thinks it's solvable, and he says that's why you voted for me. That's why you voted to keep me in office for the recall, although I haven't done a single thing for the homeless. And that's why I was being recalled. And our former mayor, whose name is Willie Brown, I think is well known, thought the country was a very good state assembly leader.
Yeah.
He said once, I don't know what to do. You know, he was giving them bus tickets back home to where they came from. He would pick them up, put them on a bus and send them where they came. He said, but you can't do that. And not for thousands of people. He says, I don't know what to do. And I'm saying, if people are sleeping and living on the streets, it's not healthy. Young children walk by, they can get sick. An older person can walk by and might get sick from somebody like that. And if the people who are homeless, they don't even themselves particularly want to live, particularly they don't want to deal with the world. So it should be illegal. You can't do that. That would be one way to solve the problem. The homeless have to go to the outskirts of town. In the 30s, we had hobos. They didn't have their campfires right in front of Saks Fifth Avenue. They were on the outskirts of town. They were taking the trains, going here and there. So we could have tents. We could have even army barracks. We could have even nice facilities for homeless. But they shouldn't be. It should be against the law. Problem solved in one sense. And there are some cities in the United States that don't have homeless, that could. I believe the mayor of San Diego at one time, who I don't know his politics, but he claimed when he was running to replace Governor Newsom that there's no homeless in San Diego. We have dealt with it. And that's one reason you might want to elect me. So it's not hopeless.
Yeah. And in your essay, which I really found quite fascinating, again, you have a gift for shining light on things and giving a new perspective that I hadn't really thought about. Most of us, we're so used to just reading the newspaper. Oh, we must have a government program for this. Well, maybe not. Maybe we need to step back a bit. You wrote about the history, really the history of cities. And I know in your books you point to ancient classical thinkers like Aristotle. It's like, look, there's some wisdom here that we could benefit from hearing. And so similarly with cities, you took us all the way back. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there are two people who I refer to. I have a chapter called "What is a City?" in the San Francisco Conservative. And maybe not in that chapter, but somewhere I talk about Aristotle's notion of property. And I thought it was so amazing that when you read Aristotle, if I didn't say who he was, if I'm reading out loud to you, you would have no idea. He talks just like we talk. And the issues of the day in 5th century Athens, 1st century Rome, 18th century Age of Enlightenment in Europe, those were three great periods. The people talk like us, and it's the same problems. Why can't we look to see how they handle things? And with Aristotle, for example, I just love that guy. He says, property, there's three ways of having property. The state can own everything. And that's the end of any problems with property. The state owns everything. Or some middle ground, where the state owns some things, individuals own some things. Or you can go absolutely free. There's no government ownership of any property. And that's, Aristotle said, that's what I favor. And the reason, diversity. Those are today's words. You have a more interesting economy, you have a more successful economy, a more dynamic economy. Aristotle was saying that 2,500 years ago, and other people have said that over time. Then there's a person named Jane Jacobs in the 1960s who wrote about what is a city. She gave an example of New York City. She gave an example of Morningside Heights, I believe where Columbia University is, Juilliard is. Says there's parks, there's everything that you think a city, a good urban neighborhood would have. You can walk along the water, there's restaurants, there's parks, there's schools, and there's some very nice housing. And that in the 60s was becoming a slum. In the 50s and 60s, and the more they spent and the nicer they made it, it became more of a slum. Because it's what it was, you had huge spaces and nobody walking around. At night, people weren't walking around. You had created big public spaces where nobody was at, and that's just great for crime. One lone person walking there, it was a high crime rate location. Cities are a dynamic place. And they should be going day and night. People look out the window and you see people. In Los Angeles, you look out the window, you don't see anybody. You're in a suburb. In Los Angeles, there's a high crime rate because nobody's watching, no one's looking out the window just to be looking out the window. And then I say that cities developed as places of commerce. In the Middle Ages, they were towns. Farmers and artisans brought their wares, and then they got tired of commuting and they built a little residence on top of their stall. With the Industrial Revolution, we had manufacturing. Pretty soon those towns became cities. And so a city should be it's a place of commerce. It's not a place of residency. And that changes how everything is. So if you have homeless all over the place and making people not want to come into town or not want to walk around, you're destroying what a city is. You can't allow it. You can't have homeless people just living on the streets and not using toilets. You can't allow it. You destroy the city and you destroy the country.
I follow you, certainly. I just want to give a little.
Too long an answer, maybe.
No, it's a complicated subject. I don't expect a short answer at all. Just want to remind our viewers and our listeners that you are enjoying A San Francisco Conservative, enjoying the wisdom of David Parker, author of that book, A San Francisco Conservative. And we're talking about cities and homelessness, which is certainly a tremendous American problem we need to get a handle on one way or another. And so, David, I was just thinking, you mentioned Willie Brown of San Francisco, who I'm certainly familiar with. I've never lived in California, but he really rose to national prominence. And, you know, I do live fairly close to New York City. So I think of mayors who made an impact. Rudy Giuliani was there during 9/11. Michael Bloomberg, former businessman, you know, owner of Bloomberg News and so on, who, you know, billionaire and whatnot. Even Ed Koch, had a pleasure to meet Ed Koch years ago. Do you think being a mayor prepares a political leader to manage, maybe, you know, I don't know, even for the presidency? I mean, is there something about American cities where you have to handle, you know, a variety of issues and that kind of thing?
Yeah, a president has to have really deep experience with big stuff. A person who's a great military leader during a big war, he has deep experience. He's making decisions on the spot that lots of lives are. If you're a CEO of a big company, that's especially a dynamic company, and you can't make wrong decisions, and lots of people's lives are at stake, that's training for president. And if you're a head of a major city with that's a dynamic city and maybe has lots of problems and lots of conflicting points of view, you can handle that city. That's preparation. Yeah, that's good preparation.
Okay. And what about somebody who spent, say, 40 years as a United States Senator from Delaware, who was vice president to a historic president? Would that be a great training for a dynamic, effective president?
Well, you could say Nixon was vice president to a dynamic person, Eisenhower, and Nixon traveled around the world while he was vice president. He was a very active vice president, as opposed to some presidents weren't so active. So Nixon had some training. Not all vice presidents have training, though.
What do you think about our current president, Joe Biden?
Well, Joe Biden has experience. He handled the Iran-Contra hearings, and he's been around, and he's qualified to be president. I'm not. Yeah, his policies are something else, but he's qualified to be president. For example, Donald Trump or Arnold Schwarzenegger have led big companies, but they have no political experience. You have to have political experience to be the president. You can't just have experience without, and they weren't successful. They even had ideas, both Trump and Schwarzenegger, but they couldn't do them. They couldn't control their legislature. Yeah. They hadn't paid their dues as politicians. Yeah. And it's a political job. You have to have brought both sides together during conflicting issues and settled it. Then you have experience. If you've never done that, you don't have experience, and the first obstacle, you're not going to be able to handle it. Trump didn't get any of his programs through, and neither did Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah. They weren't qualified for the job.
Yeah. I want to circle back a little bit to the homeless issue, and it also has to do with law and order. Again, I found your essay very interesting. And you wrote about some of America's more liberal cities, like San Francisco, like New York City, and others. And there's some interesting things that happen when it comes to law enforcement because of the nature of those cities. That in the early days, they were a mecca for commerce, as you said, but things evolve over time. Can you elaborate on that? And also, maybe it's two different issues, but I also think about a lot of homeless people who seem to have mental issues when it comes to law and order and our responsibility to take care of them. How do you balance all of these issues?
Yeah, a lot of homeless have mental issues. That doesn't mean that we just say it's okay. The liberal progressive cities often think in terms of the humanity of the criminal or the person who commits a crime. Maybe they had reasons. Maybe they had a difficult childhood, or maybe capitalism and racism are just too much, and life is just too much. And they're not dealing with enforcement of the law. They're dealing with the human side of it.
So you're
But that's
saying we should be more, you're saying we should be more compassionate then?
No, I'm saying the opposite. We can be compassionate, but then do something. Don't just let it sit. And liberals also are, from my experience, are not crazy about firearms. Just in general, they don't like hunting. They don't like people with guns. And so they tend to look the other way with respect to their police departments. They don't want to know what they're doing. Police departments should be monitored by the state or the city, and they should be monitored by themselves. But if the state isn't monitoring them, they have no incentive to monitor themselves either, because nobody's looking. And so they attract the most liberal cities are the ones where the citizens know the least about what their police department is doing, and it attracts crazy people. Gunslinging police, vicious police are attracted to those cities. LA is a very liberal city and has known for having one of the most vicious police departments. San Francisco has a very vicious police department. New York there's some viciousness in New York, not all. And Minneapolis celebrates Juneteenth. It celebrates Black Lives Matter. And they're proud to say that we're a multicultural environment. They have the most vicious police department. This is my theory. I make this up, but I believe it's correct. That guy Floyd was badly handled, badly treated. The citizens don't know what the police are doing, and they don't care. They don't want to hear about arms and policing, and so it's neglected. You can't. They don't want to hear about the homelessness, and they don't want to hear about crime. They don't want to hear about their police, because we're compassionate, good people. We have better things on our mind. Mistake.
What do you make of the again, maybe this is going way off on a tangent, but during Trump's presidency, he really sort of like Nixon. I mean, I was probably 10, 12 years old when Nixon was president, but I remember it was big law and order. We got to shut down these Vietnam protesters. I mean, there was so much of that there in San Francisco from what I recall. But again, Trump seemed to make a big issue about law and order, but at the same time, now we have a congressional committee looking into what happened when rioters stormed the Capitol. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, beware people who scream law and order. They're probably the opposite themselves personally. I'm not screaming law and order. I'm just saying homelessness shouldn't be allowed, and move them to the outskirts of town or into some kind of housing, some tents or barracks or something, and you're disrupting the beauty of and greatness of a city. Yeah. And you'll have cities die if you don't solve the problem.
Yeah, no,
so if I say enforce the law, that doesn't mean law and order at any price. I'm not saying that either.
Yeah.
I'm a San Francisco conservative.
Yeah. And last question, we just have a minute or two. What I must admit, I love San Francisco. I've probably been there 20 or more times over the years, but it's been a few years since I've been there. It could be 10, 12 years, something like that. Are there some changes that you'd like to see in that beautiful city by the bay?
I'm nostalgic for North Beach, for people talking to each other in restaurants, for the hippie generation a little bit. That's where I come from. It's becoming a monolithic city. Everybody's working in Silicon Valley. They don't want to work down there, so they live in San Francisco. So I have a diverse neighborhood, but nobody's earning less than $1 million a year anywhere in town today. It's not a multicultural neighborhood in a genuine sense, and it's becoming monolithic. And I'm starting not to like the city, and it's because of shopping has changed before COVID. Even you go downtown, there's no record stores, there's no bookstores. All there is some few high fashion shops and a few restaurants geared to tourists, not even geared to San Franciscans. The city is losing the reasons to be here. And the Silicon Valley crowd, they don't really support the arts. It's not what they're about. They're not supporting the symphony and the opera and the ballet. San Francisco has almost no theater. They haven't played a Shakespeare play, I think, in 20 years in San Francisco. It's becoming a really provincial location of very rich people. You walk into a cafe, no one looks up, they're all on their laptops. The other day, I was so mad. When I'm leaving the cafe, I opened the door and I yelled, "Goodbye, everyone." People looked up, "Oh yeah, bye," and went back to the laptop.
Right.
I was so mad. The city is dying in one sense.
Yeah, but you're at least you're out there with your jazz group a couple times a month, and so if anyone watching or listening, they can, number one, they can go to your website, davidparkeressays.com, to purchase copies of your books, Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative, or on Amazon. Can they also find information about the Dave Parker Sextet?
Well, davidparkeressays.com has a, you can go to daveparkersextet.com also.
Excellent.
And we play once a week someplace.
Excellent. Well, if you are there in the San Francisco area, ladies and gentlemen, are going to be visiting, as I
for the last 20 years.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Well, thanks, David. I really enjoyed it. Look forward to the next time.
Good. Thank you, Tom.